Welcome to Conversatio, the Belmont Abbey podcast. This podcast aims to form and transform the community so each of us can reflect God's image. I'm Dr. Brad Frazier, and I'm thrilled today to welcome Navy Bob Ronska, who had 28 years as a Navy captain. He was a military aide for President George W. Bush. He commanded nuclear submarines in the Navy and just has an amazing career. Now he's moved has an LLC also called Navy Bob in the healthcare industry, and has written a book that we're going to talk a little bit about today in servant leadership. So it's just a pleasure to have you and your chief of staff, Karina, who wasn't able to join us, but she's traveled with him. So welcome, Bob. It's just a pleasure to meet you and have you with us.
Thank you, Dr. Fraser. Such an honor and privilege to be at this incredible campus. Just
Great.
The culture is just amazing.
Awesome. We're so glad to have you. So we were just going to talk a little bit, a couple of questions about your experience. There's a lot to talk about, but one of the things that struck me, especially in our leadership program here, was you talked about leading with love. And I was wondering if you could expand a little bit about that, about how you use that, incorporate that into dealing with life and death situations that you had to deal with in the Navy and in your career working at the White House, and now in the healthcare industry. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So I started writing my book, Beyond the Sea, Leading with Love, about 4 years ago. And as I reflected back, love was not even in the definition or title. And when I started digging in, my successes and also my failures, I looked at the common threads, which was love, and the absence of love, which I call basically apathy. And so one of the stories, I'll share two in the military, and they think, how is it that you commanded a $2 billion nuclear submarine responsible for war and also carrying the nuclear codes responsible for Armageddon? How could you possibly talk about love, leading with love? Because people think in the military it's all about command and control, do as I say, authoritative type leadership, and that is not the case. So I'll share two real quick stories that was the aha moments for me as I'm writing this book. And as I started digging in the chronological stories of my life through also investigating empirical evidence, academic research, there's no doubt leading with love is the most effective leadership style that even in the military, across every single industry at any ages. So the two stories that I'd like to share is, one, we were on a mission vital to national security. We were behind enemy lines. And we were stone throws away from the most capable submarine that was out there. And our 377-foot ship was cloaked underneath the ocean floor. And the only thing that was exposed was a periscope. And we're surrounded by their fleet that could easily secure access, and we'd be trapped. And we were on this mission vital to national security. And I thought there was a 100% chance that they found us. And let me tell you what was at stake. If they found us, our action was to get out of there as soon as possible. And if they knew we were there, they would have done anything to get us to surface, to include using force, weapons, and they want to get a picture of us on the front page of USA Today. And so my crew's safety was at stake. And the second thing, if we were wrong, if you take the cost of this $2 billion nuclear submarine and the cost of the amount of cycles, the cost of the crews, the cost of this one event was about $100 million to taxpayers. And if we left, there was no turning back. We would have lost $100 million because we were there. So I made the decision after indications, not one, but multiple, that we were most likely counter-detected. They had us. I was about to announce left hard rudder, make your depth 400 feet, all head standard. This is the captain. I have control of this submarine. And as I'm opening my mouth, it was my executive officer who stood in front of me, Gary Montalvo, and he says, "Captain, let's stick around to see if they have us." I look at him like he had two heads. What don't you see that I see? And then someone else spoke up and says, "There's something's not right." And we stuck around, and it wasn't us. They didn't have us. Wow. And if I were the captain, the senior person, the old man of that ship, once I made the decision, it was over. But the question I had looking back, why did he speak up? Why did he risk his career? Because if he was wrong, every second counted. It could have made it much worse. Why did he speak up? And there's no other way to explain it but other than love.
Yeah.
Love is defined as sacrificially of giving of oneself for the benefit of others. And he did that for himself because he knew that I would sacrificially give myself for the benefit of him.
Right. That's an amazing story. I can't imagine the pressure. It's unbelievable. Speaking about that, one of the things you mentioned that comes to mind in our leadership program is about trust. And to me, that's just an amazing example of trust. How do you develop that level of trust when obviously in life or death situations that you're dealing with, but just in the workplace?
So trust is one of the most key things any leader could develop. And trust doesn't come easily. It's like going to the gym. Mm-hmm. It takes time to build up. And the best definition of trust that I came across during my doctoral studies was trust is defined as having good intentions and to follow up your words with actions. You're not going to trust somebody as a leader if you don't think they have good intentions. And leading with love, when you sacrificially, over time and time, give yourself to someone else, they know through your actions that you have good intentions. Mm-hmm. But it's an and. You have to follow up your words with actions. Love alone is not enough.
Right.
And if you have a leader that says that they're going to do something for you and they don't do it, you might ask them one more time. But the third time, you're not going to ask that leader. And are you going to trust that leader to follow through? No. So those two components are essential to building trust. Mm-hmm. It's leading with love, which I did, but also follow up your words with actions. And I instituted this one simple technique called the Crew Top 3. I took the worst summary, that culture at the end, my 3-year, that example that I gave of potentially getting found by the most adversary country. That did not happen overnight. Mm-hmm. When I first took command of the ship, the culture was like the game whack-a-mole. You all heard the game. Yep. It was like, it was an if, it was when we were going to have another issue. And the culture, it was apathy, and the crew didn't care for the ship because the ship didn't care for them. I started this one simple thing. It was Crew Top 3. Tell me what your top 3 concerns are. And I did that every month. And I found out things like there wasn't sufficient number of computers on board. And when you take a new Virginia-class submarine, which the Texas was, everything worked off of computers. So any maintenance, any training, anything you needed to do operated off a computer, and half the computers were broken. And what that entailed was about 2 hours of extra time each sailor had to stay on board, and they couldn't be with their families because of a lack of computers. And that's when the light bulb went off for me. No wonder why we're having all these issues, because the crew doesn't care for the ship, because the ship doesn't care for them. Mm-hmm. So I fixed the computers. I told the crew, I'm so sorry. I started this Crew Top 3. We went from the worst performing submarine to the best. We were the Battle E out of 10. We had the lowest retention, highest retention, lowest turnover in the Pacific Fleet for 2 consecutive years in a row. It was a message that came out. Yeah. And we had scored the highest possible grade on any exam. So at the end, we saved the taxpayers $100 million. Yeah. So that is the other light bulb that came to me, is that was what I did. Mm-hmm. I had a mindset that I was in command to serve the crew. The crew was not there to serve me. And when I had that mindset, of that leading with love mindset, outcomes went up unbelievable. It was like the Back to the Future movie, mm-hmm. going 88 miles an hour. Our outcomes went up unbelievable. And I wasn't anything special. I didn't have, technical ability, anything greater than anyone else. But the gift that I did was lead with love. And this is what I want to share in the world.
Absolutely. That's a great story.
And I'll tell you one last thing. You know what the biggest litmus test was with the Crew Top 3? Mm-hmm. I continued it every month while I was in command for 3 years. That stack went from this to this to this mm-hmm. to this. Do you know what there was only one concern when I left. I remember this. It was like a couple days before the change of command. I was ready to leave, and I continued this. And there was only one Crew Top 3 sitting on my desk when I was about to leave. And I'll never forget it. It said, the top concern that the crew had was there wasn't sufficient variety of hot sauces on their mess decks. I started to laugh. I immediately got new hot sauces. Yeah. But if you have a culture that your team members are worried about having a variety of hot sauces on a $2 billion nuclear submarine, You know, you hit that magical
Absolutely,
culture.
absolutely. Well, the military runs on its stomachs, as often
Yes.
it's often said. So that's great. Well, you mentioned something about trust. So obviously, it takes that type of development to get that kind of trust. In our Master of Leadership here program, we focus on servant leadership, and there's a lot of different definitions of servant leadership. But in the general sense, I was wondering if you could describe. That is obviously another one. But do you have any other anecdotal stories you could share about servant leadership and how that builds trust and how that helps the organization?
Absolutely. So the other example I share in my book, real life example, and I've seen this in every industry, so I don't want to just focus on military, but this is really profound. When I was going to deploy on my second submarine, it was the USS La Jolla. It was specially fitted out with a thing called a dry dock shelter. And in that dry dock shelter, a little submarine would be placed in there. We would deploy with SEAL Delivery Team 1, Navy SEALs.
Yeah.
We would get underway from Pearl Harbor, go miles, thousands of miles from our home port, and we would, undisclosed, go to a certain location. They would get out with their little submarine, go do what they have to do. And it was just amazing, what they were doing. But I'm not here to talk about SEAL operations. When we were deployed with that SEAL delivery team, if you ever seen the movie Lone Survivor, Michael Murphy was SEAL Delivery Team 1. So he was part of that team that was in real world as Lone Survivor was occurring, real time, were deployed with me on my submarine. I saw that culture. And I also saw the reactions when they found out that they lost so many of their SEAL members. It was devastating. But fast forward, 3 years later, here's me helping President Bush on the stage posthumously provide the Medal of Honor to Michael Murphy's parents.
Wow.
And you know who was in the audience? Was the lone survivor, Marcus Luttrell.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
And if you look at the movie, if you haven't watched it, it's a must-watch movie, a must-read book. He, knowingly he was going to die, and he went up on this ridge so that he can get communications to rescue his fellow members. He knew he was going to die. So there's no other way to define what he did as an act of love. It's sacrificially of giving of oneself for the benefit of others. And there's no greater sacrifice than giving up one's life for another. So when you say the Navy SEALs and the military don't lead with love, I completely disagree. There's no other way to explain it. And if you think about the Navy SEALs and the nuclear Navy safety record, it's unmatched. And so if you want to just take a piece of this in any organization, follow the same script. As a leader, you sacrifice yourself. It doesn't have to be where you sacrifice your life, but things such as letting people go home if they're sick, taking care of their families, or asking how they're doing, of taking up the time, which is so minimal. This is what we're trying to offer in this book.
That's great. Well, I look forward to reading. You've got another new one coming out or just published.
Yes.
In healthcare. We'll talk about that in just
Yes.
a second. But so you've already described a couple of scenarios that are just, for us are just just so thrilling to listen to. I wanted to ask you about in times like that, under stress, when you were thinking about being discovered and in your time as a military aide. I was wondering if you could talk about how you maintain clarity and, more importantly, your ethical integrity in times when, that's a pressure cooker. And how could we tell our students about there are going to come times, maybe not in a nuclear submarine, but there are going to come times when they're in the pressure cooker, and how not to falter?
So it's a great question. And in my book, I had several people ask me, and they title it WWNBD, and that stands for What Would Navy Bob Do? And I smile because I used one formula that is not unique, and I wasn't anything special. But my formula was what they saw to me, what would Navy Bob do? Mine was, what would Jesus do? Mm-hmm. So any decision that I made, if it was for the greater good of something, for the organization or someone else, I knew was the right decision.
Right.
So I had faith underneath the incredible stress or strain of any situation, that I knew my faith, if I was going to be put in a position that whatever I did wasn't because it was because I did something for myself, and I could be rest assured that it was the right decision. And if bad things were going to happen, and I did everything I could mitigate it, then it was meant to be. But I also found incredible strength in my team. that I knew that I'm human, that I can make an error, and my greatest line of defense wasn't my personal capability, which is important, but my greatest line of defense was the people around me. And that culture, for them to speak up and for them to have their own critical thinking, is that confidence, and along with my faith, was the most important and important aspect of my success. There's no doubt in my mind.
That's great, and caring, leading with love, and all of that. So it's just such important. I wish more of the business world would understand that, and corporate America, where which is my background initially. And so that also helps you keeping a level head as well too. Is another area I was going to talk about keeping calm and just trusting in your team. Surround yourself with good people. That's really great advice. I was interested in your time as a White House military aide. I was wondering if you could share if you learned any leadership anecdotes or nuggets from President and Mrs. Bush when you were working with them.
Absolutely. And so in my book, it's like I said, it's a chronological journey from my childhood to submarines, and it really talks about my experiences of those leaders that led with love and those that didn't, and the results that you get. And when I worked for President Bush and Mrs. Bush, there was so much love. And in my book, I talk about specific examples. That one I'll share here is when I was there from 2006 to 2009, at the tail end of his time as president, he made the decision, and it's clearly outlined in his book called Decision Points, where he would do a surge, where he would put more troops in to win the war. Against every council, he put more of our loved one troops. He's the commander-in-chief in harm's way. So at 5 o'clock in the morning when we were at the ranch, his ranch in Crawford, Texas, I was tasked as his military aide to be his personal aide while we were at the ranch for 3-4 weeks at a time. And at 5 o'clock in the morning, give you one example, I'd be standing out 50 yards with the Secret Service agent underneath the Texas sky. No one was there. And he'd get up in the morning at 5 o'clock in the morning, the light would go on, and he'd turn on the coffee pot, go to the bathroom, and he would come out disheveled, just waking up, no socks, just shorts and a T-shirt, and he'd come out with his arms and say, Navy Bob, how did we do last night? And I knew exactly what he was asking, because what I was bringing him was a situation report from the sit room, and it would detail this big events. And at the top of each report was if we lost any of our soldiers, Marines, airmen. And when I would tell him that, Mr. President, we have great news, we didn't lose anybody last night, he would turn into like a kid in a candy store. What are we doing today? Are we biking ride? Are we cutting? Did you see Barney? I think he's out there, skunk. Yeah. He would be like so elated that he didn't lose anybody. But those days that we lost somebody, he would just take the paperwork, turn around, and just walk into his house. And you could just feel that weight. And going back to talk about what love is sacrificially of giving of oneself for the benefit of others. He could have made that decision to safely protect our troops, but he knew that the devastation across the world and if he pulled out of this war, how many other people would have died and so much suffering. He made that decision to sacrificially of give himself for the benefit of others. Mm-hmm. And so I'm not saying the decision was right, wrong, but he knew that right decision was to continue on, and it was the right decision to win the war. But that burden put on him, and it was a sacrificially giving of oneself. So in my book, I clearly outlined how I learned leading with love from the highest levels to include the President of the United States.
That's awesome. That's great. Thank you for sharing that. We often hear, the curiosity about the nuclear codes, and there's it's always in movies and themes and like that. I was wondering if you just talk a little bit about, I think it's probably a misconception about what that entails, but I know it's got to be an enormous pressure and how that applies, to everyday leaders and in the workforce.
So going back to the faith that they had in me, the faith that I had for the country was immense, and I knew that. If we ever had to go to nuclear war, the devastation would be incredible. And we have never had, so the greater good of that, and why I was honored to do this, is because if you look at the people, the number of casualties during World War I and World War II, it was approximately 71 million and 40 million respectively. We have never had the scale, worldwide scale of devastation since World War II.
Yeah.
Why? And a lot would argue it's because of the deterrence of nuclear weapons. So even though I was carrying the nuclear codes that would be responsible for possible Armageddon, I also knew at the time that I was also providing a deterrence to prevent multiple people from dying because of this deterrence.
Yeah.
So it was a responsibility that I took like to heart. And so I was doing a greater good by having these nuclear codes. So about the nuclear codes. The nuclear codes are there to give the president, the commander-in-chief, valid and authentic orders to make sure it's him, and to give him the ability at a moment's notice to be able to authorize the release of nuclear weapons from the nuclear triad, which is the bombers, the ICBMs, and the most survivable, which is the ballistic missile submarines. And so by doing that, it provides that greater deterrence, because no country knows that they could ever sneak an attack on us, and they're not going to get retaliated against.
Yeah.
So the nuclear codes is an ability to have a 24/7 presence where the president will be informed and he will give the authority to be able to retaliate on any country or any adversary at a moment's notice with unbelievable destruction, to let them know that you will never, ever launch nuclear missiles on us. Because if you do, there will be consequences. And so in the nuclear codes, it is, like I said, I can't talk specifics.
Sure.
But it is an ability that, as the military aide, that I am the enabler to be able to bring the president and those in charge to be able to release nuclear weapons together in any moment to be able to execute this so that we protect Americans.
Very good. You know, at Belmont Abbey, we focus on Catholic ethics and Benedictine values. And I was wondering, just a little bit off script about that. I know we've talked a lot about trust, servant leadership, but your personal story of faith has to be an integral part in your faith life. I was wondering if you would share just a little bit about that and how this has impacted your leadership, your view of the world, and your career.
Absolutely. So I did grow up Catholic. I believe in faith, and looking back, you know, I teach leadership at University of Central Florida. So I've been embedded in leadership, and to me, it goes through the whole chronological leadership, where it came from, where it was taught, how it changed, and so forth. And if you look at this, the greatest leadership book that's ever been written, or the greatest leader to ever exist, in my opinion, is the Bible and Jesus Christ.
I agree.
And it has there's no doubt. I mean, if you look, the Bible is still talked about. And we're talking 2,024 years ago,
Yeah.
with Jesus coming to this earth. That's what we talk about. And how did Jesus lead? Jesus led with love. So when I was in command underneath stressful times, I used that great example. And I don't know if that was the example why I did it, but I know it works. And I'm not trying to put religion into corporations. I'm trying to put what works in religion, which is love.
Yeah.
And if you look at this, it boggles my mind, is that leading with love, there's over 50 years of academic research that shows that when you lead with love and compassion, and leading with love is not soft, is not romantic, it is about caring for others. And when you care for others, you're not leading softly. You're going to be able to have outcomes exceed all expectations. Yeah. And there's no downsides. Your outcomes will exceed all expectations. You will be a legendary leader. You will build a legendary culture and lead a wonderful life. There is no downside. And yet leaders are not doing this. Why? It's because they haven't been taught this.
Yeah.
And two, they're using the playbook that always been taught to them. And so if we can start this movement where leading with love will help them and help this country. This is why why I'm here.
It's interesting, you and I share that. I teach in the Master of Leadership, and when we developed it, and you teach at Florida, that's kind of been my motto: is can we change the world? Well, yeah. I mean, it may take some time, but if we start sprinkling graduates and people we touch and that get this message out, that it can make a profound difference on our world.
That's where this is why I love this school, that you can be a role model for the world. I just spoke to a large corporation. I'm not going to name the corporation, but I was spreading the word of leading with love. I gave out an empirical academic paper that shows through empirical evidence that leading with love has all outcomes. And I gave them the crew top 3 and how you do the crew top 3. I'm starting to spread this. And one of the comments that came back was a lack of hope, because they believe that, it's like, just fixing one department will then die out after a while because new leaders will come in. So this is something that will just not be sustainable. And I tell you that it is sustainable. And because people don't believe in it, and we haven't shown that we can spread this, which you can, people lose faith in why leading with love is important. Yeah. They revert back to their selfish ways. Mm-hmm. And so if we can get this critical mass, we can really make this. And how we can do this is, there was an example of multiple people that I have taught throughout the book in those examples. Mm-hmm. There was a person that was my engineer. And out of the blue, after I wrote this book, there was a lieutenant that worked for him. He comes to me and sends me an email. He says, Captain Ronska, he says, I have never met you. You don't know me, but you have made a profound impact on my life. He goes, what you did after reading this book and how now my engineer, who's captain for him, has leads exactly like you did. You have changed my world, and I'm going to spread this along to everyone else. So leading with love, it has to start one person at a time, but as we pay this forward, it's going to exponentially grow, and we need to start this together.
Yeah, I agree. That's wonderful. Your book is Beyond the Sea, Leading with Love from the Nuclear Navy to the White House and Healthcare. You've transitioned into healthcare. You've got a new book coming out. I was wondering if you would talk about, we've talked a lot about your book, and I've read your book, and it's a lot of this is in there, but can you talk about your new book and how your experience in the military and in this military aid, now you're applying it in the healthcare industry?
Yes. So I believe everything happens for a reason. Mm-hmm. I think there's a reason why I'm here. I think there's a reason why I wrote these 2 books. And I'm inspired by Mr. Rogers. Mr. Rogers went to Rollins College, where I went to, although he grew up in Pittsburgh. But Mr. Rogers has said it so eloquently that God has put us on this earth for one purpose and one purpose only. And that purpose is to serve others or help others. And when you find that service to others, no matter what it is, your purpose in life, the wholeness, the fulfillment that you will feel will be undeniable.
Yeah.
I didn't want to write 2 books. No intention. I was thinking about getting out of the Navy because of family considerations. And I started researching, defense contracting, what everyone else does. Yes. But I reached out to Dr. Coleman, who used to be the President Obama's head physician. I worked at him with the White House. I call him up. I said, Doc Coleman, I was in Orlando before I was stationed there for nuclear power school. I said, do you know anybody at Lockheed Martin or Northrop Grumman that you play golf with that would be interested for consulting? Because I love the area. He says, why don't you come work for healthcare? I said, what are you talking about? The 10th largest hospital system in the country. I said, I have no clinical background. He says, no. He says, you're high reliability in the nuclear Navy. You have 20-year-old sailors that are operating these highly enriched nuclear reactors, and for 75 years, you have never had a reactor accident. We need you to come into health care, which is, right now, a lot of people don't understand this, but if you watch the trailer to Air's Human trailer, you can Google it on YouTube. In 2 minutes, you will see the current state of safety in the healthcare world. And Right now, the third leading cause of death behind cardiovascular disease or heart attacks or cancer is medical errors. The third leading cause of death in this country is due to medical errors. Mm-hmm. And so this is why they were so interested of bringing me in. And in this book, what it does is, because I've been embedded for 5 years, I've been to all the safety courses. I teach quality and safety to Masters of Healthcare Administration. I know the current playbook. And the healthcare industry has never gone to the nuclear Navy to see what they're doing to be able to help this crisis in America. Yeah. And in this book, it really details the outline of what the nuclear Navy does or is doing that healthcare is not to save patient lives.
Yeah. That's it. And leadership crosses all boundaries, right?
One thing that when we teach, so you hit the nail on the head, one of the epiphany or profound things is that you can't have safety without effective leadership. Right. They go hand in hand. So we have leadership courses that only teach leadership. Then we have a quality course. They don't understand that they go hand in hand. And in the quality course, there has to be a component of leadership. And in the leadership, there has to be a component of high reliability, because you can't have effective leadership if you're killing people or not protecting your people. And you can't have effective or high reliability if you don't have a caring leader, because they're not going to do what you tell them. Yeah. So they go hand in hand, and that's what the two books mold.
That's awesome. Well, as we wrap up, I would love to talk even more, but we're out of time, and I want to conclude by thanking our audience for joining us today. And thank you, Navy Bob, so much for being here. It's been a pleasure to have you and to share your experiences and this wonderful conversation. If you enjoyed this episode today, please tell your friends. And you can find the Conversatio podcast on Apple, Spotify, and on Google Podcasts. And until next time, God bless.